My mother-in-law told me to give her my son after my husband died, but I refused. The next day, my boy disappeared, and I called the police. I am 32. I am an orphan. I was told that my mother left me at a fire station when I was a baby. I don't even know my real birthday and have never met or tried to learn anything about my biological parents. My childhood was far from ordinary. I grew up without a family, moving from one orphanage to another. However, everything changed when I turned 11. A childless couple, Mr. and Mrs. Williams, whose names I've changed, like all others, so no one could find them, came to our orphanage to look at children for adoption. Somehow, they chose me, and Mrs. Williams seemed very pleased with this decision. The paperwork took time, but when everything was finalized, I thought my life would change for the better. It felt strange to finally leave the orphanage and go with them to their home. Mr. and Mrs. Williams were quite wealthy and were initially kind to me. Mrs. Williams was very strict about neatness, and always slapped my hands if my room was messy or my hair was uncombed. She said she had always imagined her daughter to be absolutely perfect, and that I had to meet her expectations. Mr. Williams, on the other hand, was somewhat strange. He constantly walked into my room by accident while I was changing. At 11, I believed his silly excuses, but as I grew older, I noticed it happening more frequently. It made me very uncomfortable, and I begged them to put a lock on my door. Mrs. Williams refused, saying bedroom doors should always be open. I tried to tell her about Mr. Williams entering without permission, but she waved it off, accusing me of making up stories about her husband just to get my way. One night, I woke up thirsty and, opening my eyes, saw Mr. Williams in the doorway. He was just standing and staring at me. I screamed in terror, and he panicked and ran away. My scream woke Mrs. Williams, and when she came, I told her that her husband had been spying on me. My expression must have convinced her because she was furious and went to confront him, while he, as usual, was sitting and watching football. The next day, she called a neighbor to install a lock on my door. For the first time in a long while, I felt safe. But she made me promise to lock the door only at night, or when changing during the day, which, of course, I was happy to do. As a child, it was hard for me to understand exactly what was happening with Mr. Williams, because no one ever told me that what he was doing was disgusting. All I knew was that I didn't like it. I wish I could say he learned a lesson and changed, but he didn't. Although he could no longer barge into my room when I was vulnerable, he began asking me unpleasant questions when Mrs. Williams wasn't around. Female intuition never fails, and I learned to trust mine. So every time Mrs. Williams went out for groceries, I locked myself in my room and looked for a reason to go outside and spend time with other children in the neighborhood. Probably it was the time spent with peers that made me realize how much better their lives were than mine. They had fathers they could run to for comfort, who didn't make them feel uncomfortable. They had mothers who constantly cared for them, bringing snacks or water. Although I understood that I should be grateful to Mr. and Mrs. Williams for adopting me and giving me a life better than the orphanage, I still dreamed every day of the love and warmth that other children received so easily. I think that's why, growing up, I got involved with the wrong crowd at school. I so desperately wanted to be accepted that I didn't care about my reputation. So I ended up among drug users who thought it was fun to skip classes and not do homework. I wish I could go back and give myself a good knock on the head, but probably everything happens for a reason. I regularly skipped classes, drank, used drugs, and came to school in gothic outfits. Mr. and Mrs. Williams threatened to kick me out, but I was rebellious and not at all intimidated by their threats, and we constantly had horrible arguments because of it. Mr. Williams behaved strangely toward the boys I dated. He would stare them down when they came to pick me up for dates and wouldn't go to bed until I returned home. He yelled at me if I wore a dress, claiming I looked inappropriate and needed to change into something more proper. He didn't like my long hair either. He made nasty comments, like loose hair could arouse a boy. So I had to tie it back. At first, I stayed quiet, but gradually it irritated me more and more. I think that's what pushed me even more to drink, to forget how unsafe and uncomfortable I felt in that house. One night after a party, I was walking home early in the morning and stopped on a bridge to watch the most beautiful sunrise of my life. I don't know what came over me, but I burst into tears. I know it doesn't sound dramatic, but that's when I realized I had rebelled so much because I hated my life and hated everyone and everything around me. If I had continued that way, I would have ended up like the alcoholics and drug addicts in our town, dead. That's when I realized something had to change. I needed to escape from that town and those people. I can't say the change happened overnight, but I stopped hanging out and threw myself into studying. I lost many friends, but at least my grades improved. Mr. and Mrs. Williams were pleased with my positive changes, but I knew I was doing it not for them but for myself. When I finally graduated from school, it felt like I had overcome a huge barrier in my life. Yes, my grades were not Stanford level, but they were good enough to get into a decent college. However, that's when Mr. and Mrs. Williams showed their true colors. They refused to let me apply to colleges in another city. I was shocked because they were the ones who pushed me to study better. During an argument, Mrs. Williams admitted that they adopted me only so I would feel indebted to them for life and eventually take care of them. Mr. Williams agreed and added that children are essentially caregivers, and that was the minimum I could repay for all their years of effort and financial investment. I was stunned by their words, but Mrs. Williams didn't stop there. She said she had spent many years protecting me from her husband so that I would have no reason to run away. She shouted that she had deliberately made me obedient and disciplined, and would not allow me to repay her work in that way. They even threatened to destroy my diploma and burn all my clothes so I would have nowhere to go. As you can imagine, I was terrified. If I already wanted to escape before, after that conversation my resolve only strengthened. In the dead of night, I gathered all my important documents and some clothes and quietly slipped out through the window. The only thing I left was a letter on the bed, warning that if they tried to find me or went to the police, I would make sure Mr. Williams went to jail for all his inappropriate behavior. I made it clear that I would not hesitate to tell my story to everyone. I had no specific destination, but I had enough money for a bus ticket, and at 18 I knew I was finally free from my foster family. I had a friend named Lorraine, who had moved to a neighboring city, but we had kept in touch all these years. I decided her home was the only place I could go, at least until I came up with a new plan. When I showed up at her doorstep early in the morning, disheveled and with a bag in hand, I, of course, looked like a runaway. And I was. But Lorraine and her parents welcomed me warmly. She was so happy to see me that she kept hugging me. Her parents asked a few questions, looking at my belongings, and I answered honestly. I think they understood that I had run away, but didn't push too hard. I asked if I could stay with them for a few days, and they immediately agreed. At Lorraine's home, I felt safe. While living with her in the same room, I diligently applied to various colleges, trying to focus on the future. Every morning we wrote essays and applications together, and in the evening she took me to meet friends in the city. We went hiking or swimming in the lake, and I felt that I could finally breathe freely. I was surprised at how her parents allowed me to stay with them for months while I focused on college applications. Only years later did Lorraine confess that in my hometown, everyone already knew that Mr. Williams was a pervert. She told me he even had a criminal past. I was shocked because I didn't know this. But it explained why her parents didn't ask too many questions when I appeared at their doorstep that morning. That's why I will always be immensely grateful to Lorraine and her parents for their compassion and for being my refuge when I needed it most. That summer, they literally saved my life. I suppose my farewell letter to Mr. and Mrs. Williams worked because they never tried to contact me my entire life after my escape. In the end, Lorraine and I attended the same college, and her parents helped us move into a dormitory. I was happy to finally have my own bed and desk that I could decorate however I wanted. It was during college that I met the love of my life, James. Our connection was impossible to ignore from the start. He was the kindest guy I had ever met. Talking to him gave me butterflies. At first, we were friends until one day we went to the movies together. When he walked me back to the dorm, he suddenly kissed me, and we both laughed. We talked all night, which remains one of my favorite memories. James knew everything about my past and never judged me. He was upset about how disgusting my foster family was but happy that I had completely broken free from them. He also told me about his family. His mother, Martha, had been a single mother for a long time before meeting her current husband. Martha lost her first husband, James's father, in a car accident when James was a child. He spoke about how much he loved and respected his mother, how she worked hard to pay bills and provide him with a good education. I admired her strength to raise her son alone after her husband's death. James said that when he was in high school, Martha met Dean, whom she married. Dean became James's stepfather. According to him, they had a good relationship, and overall his family life was much better than mine. When my relationship with James became serious, he decided to take the next step, introduce me to his mother. Even though she often came to the university to visit him, we never managed to meet, so he arranged a dinner at a restaurant near the campus so that we could officially meet. During dinner, I immediately noticed that Martha was not pleased with our meeting at all. She bombarded me with questions all evening, mostly about my past and my family. I told her about my childhood in various orphanages before being adopted by Mr. and Mrs. Williams. Her lips tightened noticeably with disappointment as I spoke. It was clear she was not satisfied. I tried several times to steer the conversation toward her work, but Martha insisted that I tell her everything about my past because she didn't want any unpleasant surprises. She also couldn't resist commenting that she never thought her son would date an orphan and that James could have found someone better. Her words cut painfully, making me feel unwanted and unnecessary. James was furious too and repeatedly told his mother that her comments were extremely inappropriate and unfair. But Martha only argued that she was thinking of his best interests, and that a mother always knows best. Honestly, after that meeting, I was completely bewildered. However, I had never lived in a normal family, and decided that maybe this was normal parental behavior, to fiercely protect their children. I understood that her intentions came from caring for her son. James later apologized to me and said he would talk to his mother about her behavior. After that incident, I met Martha a few more times, and she tried much harder to refrain from commenting on my past. Unlike her husband Dean was very kind and always polite to me. Despite his mother's disapproval, James and I continued to build our relationship, knowing we wanted to spend our lives together. So when we graduated from college, it was no surprise that James proposed to me. We both had good jobs and were planning to move to San Francisco to start a new life. However, Martha was, to put it mildly, shocked and expressed her displeasure at our engagement party, which we organized for close friends and James's relatives before moving to California. While everyone else was enjoying themselves, she was gloomier than a thundercloud. At one point, when we were alone, she couldn't hide her contempt and directly said she never thought her son would get involved with someone like me, hinting that I was just a temporary interest. Until that moment, I had always treated her with respect, but now I knew I had to stand up for myself. I firmly told her that I would no longer allow her to speak to me disrespectfully. I reminded her that I was no longer just James's girlfriend, I was his future wife, his daughter-in-law. I understood her disapproval but emphasized that I sincerely loved her son and believed we were right for each other. I made it clear that my past was not my fault, and I was actively building a better future. I hoped for her support. In response, she just snorted and stated that she would never give me her blessing. I calmly replied that I had never asked for it anyway and left. Later, she complained to James after the party that I had supposedly been disrespectful to her. But my fiancé told her that she deserved it because she had always been rude to me. It was satisfying to watch her face flush with embarrassment. Dean later took her away while she screamed at us, claiming we were rushing into marriage and showering us with curses. Our wedding ceremony went fairly smoothly. We moved to California and lived in a rented apartment. We worked a lot but tried to spend as much time together as possible every evening. I never thought marriage could be this simple, but probably, when you're with the right person, it doesn't require extra effort. James and I discussed the future and firmly decided that children would only come when we were financially ready to start a family. So in the 4th year of our marriage, when we finally moved into our own home after many years of work, we both agreed it was time to try for a child. This house was the result of our labor, sweat, and tears. The thought of raising a baby in the space we had built together filled us with happiness. All these years, Martha barely visited, though James called and wrote to her regularly. It was clear that Martha still held a grudge, but everything changed when I became pregnant. As soon as she found out, she immediately called James, demanding to live with us in the last months of pregnancy to care for her grandchild and also to be allowed into the delivery room to monitor the process. James and I refused all her demands, and he even told her she was crazy if she thought we would agree. This sparked another argument. Martha insisted that grandmothers must act this way for their grandchildren and that if I were a good mother, I should allow her to at least be present at the birth. Naturally, my husband handled his crazy mother, and she was not allowed to be with us until our son was 5 weeks old. During this time, I was on maternity leave, and James continued to work. However, every evening he came home, bathed our son, and put him to bed. We were both exhausted, but parenting brought so much happiness. All the love and care I hadn't received in childhood made me a good mother. And I thought I was doing well overall. But when Martha arrived, her opinion was different. She disliked everything. Why am I still breastfeeding? Why is the baby sleeping alone in his room and not in bed with me? Why don't I dress my son a certain way? All these were petty criticisms. She insisted on staying with us for several weeks, and those weeks became some of the most torturous in my life. She argued with me about literally everything and even demanded that we install a camera in the nursery to watch the child 24/7. At that time, I was so exhausted that I had no strength left to argue. But every day it got worse. Martha did absolutely nothing around the house. She didn't even lift a finger to wash dishes or fold laundry. If I was busy with the crying baby and asked her to watch a dish on the stove, she loudly declared that no one helped her when she raised James and that I should handle it myself. Her presence became an additional burden. Now I had to feed one more mouth. And yet, she disliked everything. She thought 1 or 2 dishes weren't enough to feed her son. I told James the first could no longer endure this, and he asked Martha to leave the next day, which deeply offended her. She screamed that she had a right to spend time with her grandson and that we couldn't kick her out. When James pointed out that she hadn't even lifted a finger to help around the house, as close family members usually do when visiting young parents, Martha claimed I was a useless mother, poorly handling my duties, and that was why she wanted to teach me a lesson. As you can imagine, James kicked her out the next day, despite her protests. After Dean picked her up, she sent me numerous messages accusing me of being the cause of all the family's quarrels. In one message, she even expressed regret that I hadn't died during childbirth. Her hatred and anger toward me were so strong that James and I decided to completely cut off any communication with her. We informed Dean of our decision, and to my surprise, he was understanding. So for the past 4 months, I had no contact with my mother-in-law and thought it would stay that way. But my life turned upside down when I received a call from the hospital. They said my husband had been in a bicycle accident. At first, I refused to believe it was James. I remember dropping to the floor, holding my son, and feeling my body go weak. I knew I had to get to the hospital and called a colleague to look after my child. Fortunately, she agreed. I won't go into the details of what I experienced seeing my husband's lifeless body in the morgue, but I fainted from unbearable pain. The hardest call of my life was the one I made after identifying James's body, to inform Martha of her son's death. Her piercing screams of pain still ring in my ears. Upon hearing the news, James's friends and relatives rushed to California to support me and my son. We had to organize the funeral, and fortunately, friends took care of it because I was completely unable to handle anything. At first, Martha offered her condolences, saying she understood the pain of losing a husband and wished I didn't have to experience such grief. However, her tone quickly changed. She stated that I was not in a condition to properly care for my son and boldly suggested giving him to her so she could raise him away from all this grief and depression. I was stunned and stared at her in disbelief as she continued justifying her proposal, claiming that if I were truly a good mother, I wouldn't be so selfish as to keep my son during such a difficult time. I don't know what came over me, but all the years of accumulated anger and resentment burst out, and I shouted at her to leave my house. My scream was so loud that the guests inside turned around. Friends rushed to me, and when I recounted Martha's demands, they looked at her with horror and disgust. Martha shouted back, but my friends intervened and literally escorted her out. They said her behavior was abnormal and that she needed professional help. When others found out, everyone agreed that perhaps Martha was having a nervous breakdown after her son's death, and that I should simply ignore her demands. Everyone assured me that I should not let her into the house again, especially since the home now belonged to me. That night, I kissed my son goodnight and went to bed, still shocked by my husband's death and his mother's absurd demands. Imagine my horror when the next morning I woke up and found my son was not in his crib. I called the police while simultaneously turning the house upside down searching for him. When the officers arrived and asked if anyone could have taken the child while I slept, it clicked in my head. It had to be Martha. She was the only one with a spare key to our house, which we had given her many years ago for emergencies. I told the police about the unpleasant conversation the day before and her demand to take my son. The officers immediately sent a team to her address. To my immense relief, my son was found safe at her home. However, Martha was immediately arrested and charged with kidnapping and illegal entry. She kept telling the police that it was just a little joke and that she had every right to spend time with her grandson. As you can imagine, this news spread everywhere, and shocked acquaintances began calling me. Friends and family, seeing Martha in the news photos, couldn't believe she had the audacity to actually kidnap my child. Although most agreed that it was right for me to file a report against her. Some of Martha's relatives and her husband Dean believed she was simply grieving her son and that I should forgive her. Dean even promised to commit her to a psychiatric clinic to recover. So, was I wrong to report my mother-in-law for stealing my son? Or should I have ignored her actions because she lost her son and was perhaps simply grieving in her own way? Well, before we continue, I suggest sharing your opinion in the comments. Personally, I believe the protagonist is absolutely right. And filing the report was completely justified. But whether to withdraw it, I probably would have withdrawn it and given this mother-in-law another chance, especially if she is admitted to a psychiatric facility. Because yes, I understand she lost her mind and deserves punishment. But still, I would probably just change the locks and see how the situation develops further, even if it's not entirely safe. And if the mother-in-law doesn't learn her lesson later, then I would act firmly. Although I understand I may be completely wrong, and of course, her actions were absolutely unacceptable. Let's see what happened next. Update 1. I am glad most people agree that I shouldn't forgive her, and that she is unlikely to calm down after this incident. At first, I felt a little guilty when I posted, but I agree with the majority of your comments. Even my husband James would support my decision to hold her accountable. That's what I feared. So I have no choice but to continue the case. Although I don't want to punish her, I believe she must understand that her actions have consequences. Otherwise, she might try the same thing again with me and my son. As for relatives who think I should let it slide, I decided to simply ignore them and even block them. They didn't experience what I went through when I woke up to find my son missing. I am now actively seeking a lawyer to help defend my position in court and present it to the judge. Update 2. Hello everyone. I know a month has passed, but I've been extremely busy. First, I followed your advice and changed all the locks in the house. I also installed a camera at the front door and in the yard, just in case. I found a lawyer who helped me and my son obtain a lifetime restraining order against Martha, so she can never approach us again. I admit, this greatly helped me feel safe. My lawyer is confident that we will win the case, as the facts are quite clear. But of course, I still feel highly anxious. I will provide an update when the case is resolved. Update 3. As promised, I'm finally writing an update regarding the case against my mother-in-law, who kidnapped my son. The past 7 months have been exhausting, but it seems everything has finally yielded results. Without going into legal details, my mother-in-law received 3 years in prison. As expected, she and her lawyer tried everything, making up a story that she had good intentions and was just joking. But fortunately, the judge saw through all the lies and did not let the case be dismissed. It also helped that my lawyer showed the judge all previous messages Martha had sent me over the years, including ones where she wished I had died. Throughout this time, Martha never even looked at me or apologized, even when the judge asked if she wanted to say anything before the sentence. I am glad I decided to see the case through to the end. Now at least my son and I can sleep peacefully. So, that's the end of the story. You see how it all turned out. She did get a restraining order. And therefore, I think she was probably right not to withdraw the complaint in the end because I hadn't considered that moment. If she had withdrawn the complaint, obtaining the restraining order in the future could have been much harder, especially given how badly things were, as we understood from those messages. In short, thank you for listening to this story to the end. Watch our previous videos here. Also, subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. And good luck.